Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting on June 23rd, 2020. We are convened on the Squamish Nation traditional territory, and we will need a motion to adopt our agenda for this afternoon. Could I have a motion, please? Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor French. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Good. Thank you. We've adopted the agenda for today, and the first up is a library annual report. And we have with us, I believe, Ms. Bloom and Mr. Gayton, respectively Director and Chair of the Library Board. Please proceed.
Thank you very much, committee members. Is my sound okay?
Yes, you're just fine.
You're gonna
Hold on.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm Hilary Bloom, Director of Library Services, and I'm joined today by our Library Board Chair, David Gayton, who's also on the call. We're going to present to you our 2019 annual report as well as the 2020 mid-year update. Now, I need to screen share my presentation, so let me get that going. I don't see under share that my screen is an option I can choose. Is there something I need to change on my... Andrew and I did go through this, but...
Hillary. You're just passing me the presenter ball, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, try it now.
Okay, yeah.
There we go.
Great. All right, thank you. So I'm going to walk you through our 2019 annual report, which is available online. I fell into old habits and I arranged for physical copies to be made for council and then realized that that wasn't really going to be part of today's plan. So anyway, but hopefully you can see the screen here, and this is just highlighting the different sections of our report. So we have a message from the chair and from me, just sort of talking about the year that was 2019. It feels like quite a long time ago now, and some of the accomplishments that happened last year. Again, as usual, another eventful year. The main focus and our topic being the future needs study that we undertook and presented to council right at the beginning of 2020. So we had, as you may recall, in 2019, begun with a new strategic plan with 4 areas of focus. So this section of the report highlights a few of the undertakings in each of the areas of the plan. One of those being the addition of a new position, technology librarian, which happened midway through last year. A number of wonderful programs that we launched, including an online course held in person for 8 weeks with the involvement of some of the elders from the Squamish Nation. A very fun and successful trivia fundraiser event in the fall. Future needs study, which I mentioned, and which our chair David will speak to a little bit again later on at the end of the presentation. We participated in Squamish Pride. We added a new beautiful mural in the teen area. Celebrated some longtime volunteers for their long years of service at the library, and were able to have a number of staff participate in various professional development opportunities last year. The report includes a comparison of 2018 versus 2019 activity. We collect data on every conceivable data point you can measure. So this is just a few of those that I felt were of note. And if you notice, the first two are to do with circulation of materials. So the first line is looking at print circulation and other physical items. And you'll notice that compared to 2018, there was a slight decrease. But if you look at the next line, which is to do with circulation of e-books and e-audiobooks, versus 2018, there was an increase of nearly 30%. So when we measure the overall circulation of materials, the overall change was an increase, but there is a shift in the nature of the usage and materials that people are tending towards. And the circulation decrease of print materials is by no means a serious, significant decrease. So I think just generally it's showing that there's still a, ever increasing demand. And then of course now with 2020, it will be no doubt a very big increase showing with the usage of digital materials, considering we were not able to circulate print materials for some time. And I think that as people were given the opportunity to start learning how to circulate and borrow digital materials, that some of that will stick. Our wireless internet saw a 20% increase in usage over the year before, which just again demonstrates the importance of having solid digital infrastructure for the community. And we had a really successful summer reading club last year in terms of participation, with a huge increase in number of children participating. And I will say with that, on that topic, the summer reading club is continuing again this year, albeit in a virtual format, but we were successful in receiving a federal grant to hire a person to run the program, a Canada Summer Jobs position. So we do have a person who will be running that from our end to support what's been pulled together provincially for the students in BC, but we can really enhance it with some custom Squamish-specific virtual programming and essentially delivering out materials and engaging with students. So I don't have any doubt that that will still be a wonderful experience for kids again this summer. This area was just kind of a fun fact about different top titles that circulated by category. We didn't have room to include them all, but I wondered if anybody wanted to guess what the top circulating DVD TV series was. Trivia.
Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones. Still on top. It was on there last year too, but I think it was probably a different season last year than the year before than it was last year. Ever popular. This section of the report is a reflection of our financial statements, which relate directly to our audited financial statements that we had our 2019 audit just earlier this year through BDO, and so it's just a reflection of those same findings. Some more fun pictures. I had mentioned in a previous presentation to council that we have some fun social media campaigns, including Book Face Friday. So those images on the right are staff members using parts of their own hands, heads, arms to complete the book covers. And on the left were our summer students last year who ran the reading program. There's a long list of local organizations to thank for their support, as well as a number of different volunteer groups that give so much to the library every year. And as well, I really wanted to highlight the list of board trustees that are listed on the report. We were really fortunate to have had the same trustees for 2018 and 2019, for 2019 and now into 2020, which really makes for our ability to build on a lot of the things that we start and, kind of keep things moving along, which is always great. And then you'll see there that there were over 200,000 library visits last year as well. So that's it for the end of the annual report. And now I'll just touch on some of the things that are happening this year to date. library service in the time of COVID. So we've not had the usual library year, like everyone can say about their own scenarios, but we did just receive this email on Sunday from a patron, and it's to do with the takeout service that we launched back on May 21st, where we now deliver or we provide pickup, curbside pickup of library materials. But the part about that I think is important to emphasize is that it's supported by library staff, with personalized selection and assistance if people want that. So this quote from a parent says, "The Squamish Library team has been fantastic at selecting books, games, and movies for my kids ages 4 and 7. It's tough when you can't go into the library to select items personally, and next to impossible for me to remember the titles of materials my kids have liked. With only a little, like almost none, help from me, the Squamish Library staff have put together wonderful, suitable assortments of a variety of materials for my kids. Frankly, they do a better job than I do when I was able to go in person. A very professional team. I can't compliment them enough. If there are any patrons who are on the fence about utilizing their online system, rest assured, speaking from experience, you will be looking forward to receiving your books as much as your kids." So that was very timely feedback. I just felt it was important to share that out because that's real kudos to the library team for, positioning themselves to be able to respond and help. And really they're doing what they do best, which is helping people get a hold of the items that they're looking for. So as I mentioned, we've been doing takeout now for a number of weeks. That top left-hand photo is of a couple of staff members with just a very small number of the bags that we have fulfilled so far. It's steady. We've expanded our hours over the last couple of weeks, and people seem very happy with the service. The bottom left photo is just a photo of a bunch of our staff on a Zoom call. We do check-in very regularly still with each other, and we have some staff back working in the facility. Some are still working from home. For most, it's a bit of a combination of the two, but it seems to be working very well. The top right-hand corner is just a little snapshot of the chat. We have a chat function on our website, so that's another way that we support people in helping them find what they're looking for. And the bottom right relates to a new video streaming service we've launched called Canopy. So it's similar to Netflix, but it's specific for public libraries, and it's got a huge variety of online movies and short films to stream from home. And then in addition to that, we've been doing all sorts of virtual programming. So story times are online 3 days a week. We have a virtual book club running right now. We've had programs on internet safety. And in some ways, there are silver linings to this arrangement. We don't have geographical barriers to people being able to attend. So we have people tuning in from farther away than before. And again, I just want to emphasize that the resilience and the adaptability of the library staff has been truly commendable. They've been rolling with it. They've been coming up with workarounds and very creative things. And I think a lot of what has come out and what has been passed along to patrons in terms of empowering them to know how to do new things and to place holds themselves and all of that, that's all really great skills that will stick and will continue on in sort of making our service ever better. The library facility has been used as a warming center in the morning from 8 till noon, 7 days a week, the meeting room and foyer and bathrooms. And so that's going to be continuing up until the end of June, at which time we are going to pivot and work on getting the meeting room set up as a public computer access point. So we'll be able to hopefully launch that within a couple of weeks of starting that in July. And then we're looking at opening up the facility to be accessible for browsing by the community sometime after that. But we identify that the main pinch point right now is computers and printing and photocopying. So we're working on that first. And we'll be continuing with the takeout service as well in the meantime, which does seem to fill the gap. we've been proactively getting new memberships for people. So if they've never used the library before, that's not a barrier at all. So in terms of other projects that are going on, because life does keep going even during all of this, we recently learned that we were successful in 2 grant applications, one of which was endorsed by council, so the UBCM Healthy Communities Grant, to set up a system for home delivery for homebound patrons. We were successful in receiving $15,000 for that. So we will be moving forward with coming up with a plan to make that happen. In the meantime, through COVID, we've actually been already working with Better at Home and leveraging the volunteer force, including some redeployed district staff at one point, be doing some of that home delivery, but we'll actually be able to create a program that can stand on its own and live on regardless. We also just learned that we were successful in our application for a Squamish Arts Council grant, so that we will be able to engage with a Squamish Nation artist to design and install a window film covering for the front of the library, which will help, well, will actually also serve as a UV protection for the front window, but more importantly, will be a very visible, welcoming representation of the land that we are on and the history of the community, externally visible from the outside of the library. We're very excited about that. And the province did this spring announce some additional one-time funding for BC libraries. So we are happy to have received an additional $16,000 to increase our digital literacy support through most likely some purchase of additional capital to augment some of the training and teaching of people and making sure that everyone's got the digital skills that they need. So in terms of the funding approved by council to the library, you'll recall that we have a project to overhaul our public computer system this year, and we're still going ahead with that. The picture on the screen of the blue that says safe reopening of libraries, and it mentions print. Print is a service that provides mobile payment solutions, and it's a mobile layer that goes on top of your printing software, so that we can, it should really streamline a lot of the payment, the mobile payment and mobile sending of print jobs. So we're going to layer that on top as we reopen our public computing, and that should also really help improve that system. As well, we received funding to do some space improvements to the interior of the library, so we're working through that project as well, and look forward to doing some changes. So the third item on the slide, you'll see, it talks about library board resolution regarding fines. So I am very happy to let council know today that as of last Wednesday's board meeting, the library board approved a motion to eliminate overdue fines for the community. This is something that we've already had in place for children's materials for over 10 years, but hadn't extended to all other materials. And it really aligns with removing barriers to access to the community. I will let you know that we still do have measures in place to ensure that materials do come back. We still will be billing for items themselves. It's just the overdue penalty that gets applied, which often unevenly penalizes people who don't have internet access to be able to renew their books or transportation to get them back on time. So it's really exciting. It will make a difference to a lot of people who have ceased using the library for this reason, and we'll be able to just continue to align with what our values are about trying to make this place used and accessible and affordable to all, which also does tie into a lot of what council's priorities are as well. I am now going to just pass it over to David, our board chair, to speak about the next steps to do with a future needs study that we presented the report back in early 2022. So just bear with us while we shift over here.
Am I there? Oh, I see. Yes, I am there. Hello, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to Council. I'd like to start by saying that the board is really proud of Hillary and the staff, showing incredible resilience, flexibility, and I think, you know, the feedback from the community has been uniform and it has been lavish. They love what they're doing, and I think that, you know, Hillary and her team have been leading the way in terms of getting libraries up and going again. I would like to heap a little bit of praise on Council. Do you remember a year and a half, you approved our hiring of a librarian with expertise in technology? Well, COVID-19 really points out what a smart move that was. And it'll go on being a smart move as we move through and out of COVID. So congratulations to all of us. Now, I would like to refresh the theme that we started when we presented our report on our needs assessment to Council. If you remember, this was only 6 months ago, we pointed out that the library was pretty much maxed out, and we were looking forward to giving services to a population that's increasing exponentially. We said that we were running out of space, and I think we're running out of flexible space. Our space is not appropriate for what programs we need to be looking at in the future. This was reflected in the district's real estate and facilities plan. At the same time in that plan, it was clear that we need a new city hall. I think the report that's just come out by the arts, culture, and heritage people would suggest that they're looking for partnerships. They're looking for new space. They're looking for flexible space. I think, you know, if you combine this with the OCP, where I think you've made it clear that you want to prioritize development of the downtown, I think this is pushing us all to the idea of a downtown civic center. We see the library as being part of that. We're looking for some sort of center where people want to get together, where people come together for programs. I think if you look at the literature, these civic centers can take all sorts of different forms. What we see would be a civic center that would be anchored by City Hall and the library. Now, I think all sorts of other groups, other activities could be part of a civic center. There's a lot of talk when looking at civic centers of GLAMs. GLAMs are a conglomeration of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And it's interesting that a study out of Ottawa just recently looked at the economics of GLAMs for a community. It suggested that the payback for every dollar spent is about $4. And they pointed out that this is about equivalent to the development of public transport. So there's a lot of growing interest there. But I think a civic center would include a lot of groups and outside activities, markets, meetings, concerts, whatever. I think if you have this sort of a civic center, it'll bring in business. Certainly we would have to involve a lot of different groups from this. I'm not sure that council would have to do all of the heavy lifting, at least initially. But I think if we did not have strong leadership and support from council and from the district staff, this is not viable. It'll never fly. Now, I'm sure you're sort of sitting there and thinking, well, where's the money coming from, guys? And obviously, financing now is chaotic, it's unpredictable, and that's the way it's going to be for a while. And nobody can tell you exactly how that timeline is going to go. But I don't think that this is an excuse for not doing anything. I think if we have a vision, if we have an idea of where we want to go, then it's always possible to find a path. If you have no vision, then there's no point in having a path because you aren't going anywhere. My feeling is that opportunities always arise. And when the opportunities arise, we don't want to be flat-footed. So the library board has decided to move forward with looking at the library of the future. We don't see the Library of the Future as being a standalone institution. That, I think the time for that has come and gone. So we are definitely looking for partners in this. You know, I think it's a golden opportunity to develop a civic center. My feeling, and I think most of the board would agree, that if we're going to be remembered, and maybe we'll be remembered, I would want to be remembered as somebody who put us on the right path, as to somebody who is a bozo who didn't go anywhere. I have a feeling that maybe council is of the same bent. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your observations and advice, Mr. Gayton, and for your report, Hilary Bloom. Council, do you have any questions or comments at this time? I have a couple. I just wanted to, well, first of all, I do know that one of your staff members seems to be hanging out in the tropics from the image you have of the Zoom meetings, but then she's probably this very clever technology person who's able to orchestrate that or make that mirage happen. I really appreciate, and I'm sure many do, the user-friendly access that the library has offered to online services and virtual programming. I'm not a tech person, and I noticed this firsthand in people around me. The library is always there to help and to set things up. And an example I'll refer to is the Canopy service that you're now subscribing to for access to library patrons for films and documentaries and TV series free of charge. What a wonderful collection, what a wonderful offering that is. And just another reminder of that user-friendly quality and always there attribute of the library. We don't really have a recommendation that we're here to receive a report, but if there's any other observations or comments, Councillor French.
Thank you. I thought you would go to the mayor first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see the mayor, actually. I'm waiting.
I am
You actually
here.
had your hand up first, so, okay. I'll be brief. It's been made clear to us, the members of council, that the District of Squamish staff, of course, which includes the library personnel, have, through the pandemic, been working very hard and have been coming up with creative solutions to the challenges that we've faced. So I just, myself personally, want to acknowledge and recognize the extraordinary effort that has been put forward, I'm sure, by the entire staff of the library. I'm guessing some of them may have been deployed to other jobs, so the flexibility is appreciated. And yeah, I just want to recognize that we're aware of how challenging it has been and the work that's been done these last couple of weeks.
Thank you, Councillor French. Mayor Elliott.
Thank you. I am so grateful for waiving fines. I know that was an idea that I talked about when I was on the board, and I am grateful as someone who was always running a tally. But I think more broadly it speaks to the equity and the access piece, and I think it is the right move. I want to commend the library for continuing to lead on truth and reconciliation and starting important conversations in our community, especially the book club now that you've launched around 21 things you need to know about the Indian Act. So I do appreciate your leadership. And I hear you, Mr. Gayton, about wanting to have a vision and be remembered. And so I'm wondering if your GLAM vision has been communicated into our expression of interest process for the new municipal hall.
I wasn't aware that there was this process, but certainly we will if we can figure out how to do it.
Okay, I'll leave that up to Councillor Herford because he knows all about it.
Oh, good. Well, he lets us know these things. But yes, indeed, I believe he mentioned something the other day, and we would very much like to be involved.
My final question is, what does the future of the library look like as we move into additional phases on the pandemic? And I know people are benefiting from all this virtual and the book pickup, and people also miss all of you terribly. So what guidance are you getting from the BC Library Association and those sorts of groups?
I think I probably have to turn you around to get Hillary.
Musical chair. First of all, I love library directors. We meet every Wednesday at 3 p.m. provincially. 50, 60, 70 library directors on the call. The most organized calm meeting you can imagine. And so that has been great because, there's no playbook for this, same as everybody else feels. So we have a bit of a collaborative approach, but of course each library is governed by its own library board and makes its own decisions. So generally speaking, libraries, you'll see that within the next week, some libraries are opening back up their facilities. Some are not. They've decided they're not until after Labor Day at least. So it's up to each place. So I mentioned we know that computer access is the first challenge, the biggest challenge right now, because the takeout service has proven itself to work in the meantime as the way to get material. So I would estimate by around mid-July that we'll be able to have the computer access in the meeting room, printing, photocopying, all of that with staff support. And have then the foyer and the bathrooms and stuff like open as they have been 7 days a week as the warming center. As far as the rest of the facility, what I picture is being able to open again for like express browsing and borrowing. So no chairs for sitting and encouraging lingering and hanging out and chatting. It'll be pretty, all business, but giving people the ability to come in and look again, because that's the part that everybody loves. But like I said to my staff, we will get our ducks in a row and we will test it and we will feel comfortable with it before we announce anything. Usually we lead up and we acknowledge that something's coming. We're not doing that because things can change and I don't want to set up and then have to back out. So I hope that sometime by later summer we can have that in place. But if things change and the outlook changes, then we change again. As far as in-person programming goes, I don't know when that will resume. It's very problematic to try to account for all the precautions that you need to take. Of course, with that in-person setting, certainly with children's programming, that's very difficult in terms of children and keeping themselves separate and all of that. So we'll continue with the virtual program delivery for now, and we're always keeping our eye on what's coming and what else we can do. But like I said to our staff, I want us to be leaders in opening safely, not in opening the fastest, and I will stand by that and support that because my staff need to feel comfortable, and we are seen as leaders in the community, so I want us to be examples of how to be safely operating and restoring our services in phases. And I do feel glad that we've shown that to date we're meeting a need and working on the next step each time.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettigrew, did you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to echo some of the comments. I signed up for the book club, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act, and attended the first session this past Friday. I think it's reflective of all of our staff, but maybe the library is one of the groups that's on the forefront. It's such an important topic right now, and the ability to respond and to support that and have that really important dialogue, despite COVID, is really wonderful to see. It was a really big turnout, one of the bigger webinars I've been on. Some people are having challenges, and there's great support to help them work through those challenges. And so seeing the library be so effective at adapting and helping us have these important conversations is it's just wonderful. And I just will add, despite the huge turnout, I think Bob Baker and myself were the only two males at the first session. I believe more people are expected to show up at the next one, and would love some company. Great conversation, but would love some more company. And thank you for all you're doing.
Thank you. And I'm Rachel Bergquist, our Public Services Librarian, is to be credited for that, especially. If you aren't able to join the book club, because we do have to cap it at some point, there's been such a response, which is wonderful. We'll plan to do another one in the future, but I would highly recommend you read the book. It's not a long book, and it is an important book, and it was based on a blog post. That's what it was first, and then it became a book. So if you just Google 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act, it's a very digestible blog, and I'm pretty sure that within the 5-minute read or less, you'll have learned a lot of things that you may not have already known, which are all very important now more than ever.
With that, thank you, Ms. Bloom. And Mr. Gayton, we'll move on to our next presentation then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we have a presentation on a Freedom of Information Request 2019 and 2020 summary from Ms. Robin Arthurs, our General Manager of Corporate Services.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I'm just getting my item set up. Okay, thank you. Robin Arthurs, General Manager of Corporate Services. I am here today to give a very quick overview on the Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, but also on the request that we've received, a summary for the past 2 years. It's not going. Okay, I'm going to use it. Okay. All right. So for a reminder for Council and the community, there's 2 purposes under the Act, and that is to make public bodies such as the District of Squamish more accountable to the public by providing access to records and making them routinely releasable, which we have a list that's attached, and I'll get into a little bit later. It's also to protect the personal information and personal privacy of people who provide the district with information collected for applications and registrations and paying their taxes, that type of thing. And so that gives people reassurance that we're not releasing their information. A comparison of FOI requests received. In the report, you know, there's some information specific to the requests, and an important thing to note is the comparison graph that was included there that sort of looked at 5 years over a 10-year period, you know, 2015 to 2019 versus 2005 to 2009. And in 2005, the district received 13 requests. 2008, there was 9 requests. In 2019, we received 69 requests. So we've had the other thing about these requests is they are complex in nature, and it's because of the kind of information, the kind of developments that we're doing, the kind of storage that we use for our records and our email system. It used to be that people would simply put in a request, we'd go to a file, we'd make some copies of those papers in the file, but now we have multiple places that we look for records, and it increases the complexity of responding to the requests. Yep, there it says 20 requests have been received to date. Well, this was put together a couple of days ago, and we're now at 23. So we've received 3 requests yesterday. So what's a routinely releasable record? There's a big matrix that's attached to the report, and it is available on our website, and it's available to the public. It indicates all of the records that we have here at the District of Squamish and whether or not they are available just to photocopy and provide to somebody or email them to them, or whether an FOI is requested. So a routinely releasable record is something that has been on a council meeting agenda. It's maybe a study, or it's indicated in the legislation that it's open. So for example, bylaws, budgets, and business licensing, those are things that are routinely releasable and available in multiple forms upon request. Records that don't require an FOI request also include an individual's own records related to their taxes, their building plans, maybe a development permit, or their own recreation registration information. Those types of things don't require a request. And then business licenses are interesting because they relate to a business, and businesses are not afforded privacy under the Act. So that information is available through our GIS system. You can search it, or you can scroll over properties and get information regarding that business license. Indication of what kind of records require a request. It's anything that's related to an application for a permit. But that being said, we found that we were being inundated with requests related to development permit applications. And so this past spring, in the last 6 weeks or so, we have added that to the routinely releasable, just because of the volume. And what we've done is altered the form that we would be releasing to take off any personal information, but now they're available as well. So that happens sometimes. We, myself as the head, or Charlene as the information and privacy coordinator, has the ability to make a determination of what we want to make public and routinely releasable, so we did that. Bylaw enforcement records and complaints, they're one of our higher request items, but they are indicated in the Act, and they are not routinely releasable, so they need an FOI. And then there's the second biggest request would likely be around fire rescue incident reports, and even when they're not within our jurisdiction, we have to respond to them. We get a large number that are on the highway and they're not really within our jurisdiction. So we still have to process them as such and refer them to highways. So under the Act, we do have a duty to assist, and that's a legislated thing. When a request is received, it's a priority for staff to respond, and the timeline for doing so is also in the legislation. We have 30 working days in order to respond. Under COVID, the ministry has provided an extra 30 working days where necessary. So it doesn't mean we get it carte blanche, it's if we need it. And we did have a surge of requests in March and at the beginning of April. So for some of the ones that were received at the tail end, we did have to take advantage of that opportunity. There's an impact, of course, related to these requests, especially when you get 70 of them in a year. The staff that are responsive have to put their work on hold in order to respond and to search out records. And then in legislative services, there's Charlene, Melissa, and thanks to council, we now have a new position of an FOI coordinator who is administrative in nature and will be assisting to process these requests so that we'll be able to get through them quicker. And as well, we'll also be able to help the departments to retrieve records and determine which records to forward for processing. The Act also allows us to charge a fee, and the fee is established by our bylaw and in the fee schedule attached to the Act. They're really low and have not changed since 1994 when the Act came into play, except for the addition of electronic provision of records. So fees are not to be considered a barrier when responding to the Act, but the province does recognize that a fee should be charged so that there's not a number of frivolous requests or multiple requests for the same thing, that type of situation cropping up. And then commercial applicants such as law firms or developers, any other form of business, they have to provide the actual fee to provide the records, and that means they pay for staff time if we have to retrieve records from storage and the actual cost of copying. There are a few exceptions to disclosure, and that includes anything that's harmful to disclosure of business interests, so peace indications on an RFP or a tender, those types of things are not subject to disclosure. In-camera meeting minutes, anything that might harm someone's personal privacy that we've acquired, as well as anything that is taken into account for preparing for litigation or legal advice, we're not allowed to release that. And that's the end of the presentation. So if there's any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Council, any questions? I see Councillor Pettigrew.
Yeah, thank you. The first, looking at what does and doesn't require an FOI, it looks like a draft budget requires an FOI, but if I'm understanding what is meant by draft budget, we usually or often get those on an agenda and they're available to the public through the Civic website. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify that.
Absolutely, 100%. So once it hits that council agenda, it is routinely releasable. While staff develop that draft agenda, if someone was to come forward and ask for a copy of it, it would require an FOI. And we can actually deny providing that because it's considered a transitory record. It's draft, it's not final, and it hasn't hit that agenda, and it may be misleading to the public because it could go through several iterations as staff debate it prior to bringing it to council. And one of the other things under FOI is if it's going to be made public within 30 days, we don't have to release it.
Okay, thank you. And then on another topic, sorry, I've just gone blank. Can you come back to me after?
Certainly. Councillor French, and then I have Mayor Elliott. Councillor French, please.
Thank you. Chair, I was noticing in the report, in the table, there was the status of previous applications, and one of the status categories is closed. And I just would like to know a little bit more about what that means. Does it mean that whoever the applicant was got something out of the process, or
No.
just a little clarity about
Sure.
what closed means?
Yep.
I'd appreciate.
So what would happen is somebody would withdraw the request. If it was a request that had a large fee attached to it, staff go through a process of looking at what records we have available that are responsive to the request, and then we put together an estimate of how much staff time it'll be to respond to the request, to search for the records, to get them ready for release. And in some instances, this past couple of years, we've had thousands and thousands of pages involved. And so what happens is the requester goes away and they either reformulate their request and then we respond, or they narrow down the scope, for example, or they withdraw it altogether.
All right, thank you.
Mayor Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. The Schedule A of our bylaw includes a lot of things like floppy disks and computer tape. And can we update that so that it only reflects current technology? Because if someone asks us for a floppy disk, we couldn't really produce that, or could we?
We can.
There's old equipment like hidden
Yes.
somewhere in City Hall.
That's right, there is.
There
And
is?
yes, there is. And I actually have, on top of my filing cabinet, I have the floppy disks for a lot of things. And, minutes, reports, meetings, and there's places in Vancouver that can reproduce them for us. It's not that anybody asks for that, because they don't. However, our bylaw schedule is reflective of the schedule in the act, in the legislation, and what's available through there. And we can't make ours more restrictive than the legislation. We can make it looser, but we can't make it more restrictive. So yes, it seems redundant, but we're stuck with it.
Access from microfiche?
We have microfiche.
How do we have it? Do they
And we can
deliver
reproduce
it
it.
on microfiche?
We probably can, yes. Yes.
Thanks.
Very good. Councillor Pettingill, you had a follow-up, and then I'll go to Councillor Herford.
Yeah, thank you, and I remembered. So, Ms. Arthurs, you mentioned it used to be easier because we go to a filing cabinet, pull out a single file. It's much more complicated now, but just want to clarify that my understanding, it's not so much that we took a simple system and made it just that more complicated. We are tracking everything. Instead of phone calls, we're having emails, so that there's just a huge,
That's
just
right.
way more data to pull, and that's really where the complexity is.
You're 100% correct, yes.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. My question is about the routinely releasable documents and how, I was happy to hear how and now we do that because we've had a lot of requests, but can you speak a little bit more about how, what the threshold is for that, and should we make any, can we support any changes or anything to make that a more open, or to include more things in that?
Right, so definitely if the item is not something that's included on the exclusionary list, and it is discretionary, we review it, I think, close to annually, if not every 18 months, and that's when we determine how many requests have we had for certain things, and should we move it over. So it's a dynamic document.
Thank you. I was happy to hear the responsiveness there to looking at that and opening it up. I think we all appreciate the openness that we that I've experienced in my time here as well. So thank you.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you to staff for this report. I think it really helps put in context just how big of a lift this has become. And Councillor Pettingale puts it well. It's not that we're necessarily making more challenging processes. It's just that there's more data that we have to sift through. My question is with regards to fees and charges. So your last slide spoke to commercial proponents. Can you just expand on who that includes? Like, would that include a nonprofit, the media, an individual, or is that really just a corporate entity?
It's a corporate entity and the media. And so one thing that we look at, that we're required to look at when we put fees together, is whether or not a request is in the public interest. And that's defined under the legislation. It's not the same as you would intuitively think. Public interest is things like inquiries into if something was to happen to our water system, and people wanted to inquire about the health of it, and say the media wanted to report about that. There wouldn't be likely a charge, because the interest is the greater community. It's not a singular interest. So if a corporate request comes in, they're typically very narrow in their focus, and they don't have a big community interest at heart. We don't charge not-for-profits, although that being said, we've probably had maybe 2 requests from a not-for-profit in 20 years. So that's really rare.
Thank you. Any further questions? Mr. Arthurs, thank you very much. The next report will be of interest, because by that time we will have had the part-time Freedom of Information Coordinator in place, and we can reflect then on what the impact that may be to this whole process. I note that the next review date for the policy is toward the end of this council's term, so it will be of interest for us to follow and monitor, and then advise at that point on any revisions to the policy. But thank you very much, and we'll move on now, there being no recommendations from this item, to the presentation from our Sustainability Coordinator, Dora Gunn.
Thanks, Andrew.
Gunn, I haven't got the entire Hollywood Squares in front of me. If you may just let me know when you're present and ready to go.
That's funny. It's different.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I believe I am here now. I'm just going to try and share my my content here. One moment. It's got it blanked out. It doesn't give me the option to share my content.
And you're to give a presentation on the free summer weekend transit service of 2020, and you do have a recommendation to offer.
Great. It looks like I now can share my content. Let's see what we get when we do this. All right. Are you able to see my slide now?
Yes, looks fine.
Excellent. All right. So my name is Dora Gunn. I am a Sustainability Coordinator with the District of Squamish. And today I'm going to provide an update on free summer weekend transit for 2020. So we last discussed free summer weekend transit on June 2nd, 2020. Staff initially recommended deferring the free summer weekend transit to 2021, but Council asked to revisit it at this meeting today. The concerns that were discussed at that time were the possibility of free transit increasing ridership and then leading to pass-ups, given the restricted capacity of the buses for physical distancing. The current maximum capacity of the buses is 40%, as it was on June 2nd, and we were seeing about 33% capacity at maximum load times. Another concern was that BC Transit was not yet at the stage of starting to promote transit. It was considered an essential service for essential workers. And then lastly, there is a small cost providing free summer weekend transit, and we don't have the support of the Sea to Sky Gondola to help us with that this year. Okay, so COVID-19 has had some large impacts on ridership this year, which has made it really hard to predict when we might have pass-up scenarios. Ridership has been going up and down quite a lot. So I thought it would be helpful to revisit what's happening with overall ridership in Squamish and also provincially. So the graph I'm showing has the weeks of the year on the x-axis and then the average weekday boardings on the y-axis. We can ignore the blue line. That was from last year and there were some data issues, so just don't look at the blue line. But focusing on the green line, which is for this year, we can see how ridership fell in the early stages of the pandemic and has been gradually increasing since then. The red arrow on the graph indicates when fare collection resumed. So you can see there has been a bit of a dip in ridership due to the fare collection starting again. So now looking at provincial trends. So this graph is similar to the last one. It's for all the BC transit systems in the province. Again, it has weeks on the x-axis and then average weekday boardings on the y-axis. You can see the same gradual increase in ridership as we're seeing in Squamish. The red arrow again indicates the start of fare collection, which was June 1st for most of the systems in the province. There is a dip again with the start of fare collection, but then we can see that ridership does begin climbing again after that. So we don't have that data yet for Squamish, or we didn't when I put this together. But looking provincially, we can anticipate that we're probably going to see a similar thing in Squamish. So we have a dip with fare collection, and then it'll start climbing again. So looking now at Squamish weekend ridership levels. So we have the time of day on the x-axis and then the percent of seated capacity on the y-axis. And I've split out Saturday and Sunday separately. And this data looks from May 1st to June 14th. The last time we looked at this data, we were looking at May only, and we were seeing maximum loads reaching about 33% of seated capacity. So now we're seeing the maximums nearing and occasionally surpassing the 40% capacity. The reason it occasionally surpasses is because the number of people allowed on board is at the discretion of the driver. So there may have been a couple of instances where the driver felt it was okay. For example, if there were one or two family groups that were sitting close together, that might have allowed enough space for an additional person or two to get on the bus. So now that fare collection has been introduced, we might expect that the numbers could go down a little from what we're seeing in these graphs, but then probably begin to climb again after that. Even with this variation, we're still really quite close to hitting the maximum capacity at some points during the day. So we really want to avoid having more people decide to take the bus sort of optionally, and then people who really need to take it to get to work, even on the weekends, getting passed up. Okay, so when might capacity on the buses increase? We're currently in phase 2 of the BC restart plan, which includes essential travel only, physical distancing, and the restart of some businesses that were closed in phase 1. BC is saying that we may be moving to phase 3 quite soon. That's where travel within the province is possible. BC Transit's recovery plan is tied to BC's restart plan. So for phase 3, when we get there, BC Transit anticipates increasing bus capacity to 2/3 of seated capacity and beginning ridership recovery. So some budget considerations. If we were to provide free summer weekend transit based on the current ridership levels, the current per weekend revenue is about $700. So let's say we started free summer weekends on Saturday, July 4th. That would mean about 10 weekends in the summer with an approximate revenue of $7,000. That's the revenue we would not get for free summer weekends. Previously, when we had normal ridership, that same estimate was about $13,500 or so. So the recommendation, so in order to move ahead with free summer weekend transit, staff feel that additional capacity is needed, so above the 40% that we're at now, and that BC Transit's recovery plan should be at a place where they're beginning to encourage additional ridership. That's aligned with BC's phase 3 of the restart plan. So based on this, the recommendation is to implement free summer weekend transit in 2020 if the following conditions are met on or before Monday, July 27th, 2020. So the province of BC has moved to phase 3 of the restart plan, and BC Transit has increased bus capacity to approximately 2/3 of seated capacity. The reason we chose July 27th is that if we made a decision on that day, we can then provide the free summer weekends for the month of August and into early September. Any shorter than this, it might be quite confusing for passengers. So for example, if we announced free summer weekends but then ended them 2 weeks later, we felt that a month would be a good amount of time. And that is it. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Gunn. Council? If you might give me a shout if you have a question or wish to ask one. I haven't got everybody in front of me just now, so I can't see you. There we go. So any questions for Ms. Gunn?
Chair?
Yes. Mayor Elliott.
So, Ms. Gunn, just to confirm that if they announce phase 3 next week, we could implement this starting in July?
Through the chair, yes. We could. It would probably take us a few days, so we'd probably do it on the following weekend. Depending if they announce it on a Friday, that might be a bit tight, but we need a few days to make it happen. But absolutely, we can turn it around quite quickly.
Other questions? And if I could, Councillor Herbert.
I was going to move the recommendation.
Very good. Is there a seconder? Councillor Pettingill? Any further discussion? Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thanks to staff for bringing this back. I am happy to see it on the agenda and happy to support this motion. I do think it is an important part of both our economic recovery and just general access to transit. I think moving towards more free access to transit is a good thing. Appreciate that there's a capacity constraint there, so the kind of parameters that are included in this motion I think are appropriate. I am excited to see that we might be able to move that in that direction for the summer. So thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, thank you. I was really pleased to see this. I think from an equity perspective, it's really important, and I think between this and making sure that services and employment are close to where people live in our city planning are two really, really key things for us to do for our climate action goals, as opposed to, building more roads, which means more traffic and just sort of a bit of a vicious cycle. So I'm very pleased to see our focus on this and our support for this. So thank you.
Mayor Elliott.
I think this is the right direction to go to help encourage ridership recovery. I think we do have to work hard to build confidence back in the system and show that the measures can work. I do hope our staff are keeping track of where and our cash flow sits in terms of this is a small expense, but we know from other presentations that we're also losing fees elsewhere in the district. So I think this is a good decision. I'm also mindful of the fact that we haven't necessarily designated where that $7,000 is coming from, but I'm not going to quibble over that today. I think we need to keep investing in our transit system and not backing away from it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. Further comments? Then I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? The recommendation, the resolution passes. Thank you, Ms. Gunn.
Thank you.
Now, Council, we're very nearly on time. I will suggest that we take a recess, if that's all right with everyone. We have a short lunch break, so shall we reconvene at 25 minutes to 3? 2:35. Thank you. I will call us back to order then. We have a presentation from Jonas Vilaniskis, or is it together with Gary Buxton, regarding community planning, 2020 projects, and work plans. Please proceed. I'll thank you. Councillor Pettingill is just reminding me that he has indicated he may have a conflict, and perhaps I should ask that at the outset, or should have. Are there other members of council who have identified projects to be discussed in this list where they may have a conflict? Councillor Pettingill has indicated that he has a conflict on the item number in our list, number 10. Oh, I'm sorry, it's number 11, and that's temporary use permit 66. I wonder if I could suggest that we take time to address this item first while we give Councillor Pettingill a chance to excuse himself. Would that be suitable, Councillor Pettingill?
Yep, that works for me. Will Ms. Arthurs text me afterwards?
Can we wait?
What I will do is have just let us hear our staff to introduce what they're going to be present, and then I'll give you the signal, Councillor Pettingill, and we'll have Rob and Arthur's signal you back into the discussion when we're ready to proceed beyond TUP 66.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Race?
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's going to be discussed today or not, but item 14 is a waterfront landing for signage. If that does come up, I will have to declare a conflict, but otherwise I'm fine.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you. There's one here. I'm just looking for the number, the one adjacent to Eagle Run Drive as well. I would, or to sort of Eagle Run Village or the bike shop. I'm just looking for it. I remember seeing it on this list.
Referring to item number 16, however, it may also be covered under item 25.
Yeah. So if we get into that, I'll have to declare. But I'm curious to see where this discussion takes us, and if we get into the particulars of all these or not. So as a whole, if we start getting there, I will.
So I've noted these down.
Thank you.
And I'll just turn it over then to our staff to introduce the presentation. And why don't we take it to Mayor Elliott? You have some advice here.
Yeah, just a point of order. If you're going to hand over to staff for the presentation, then Councillor Pettengill.
I think you may be on mute, Mayor Elliott.
Can you hear me now?
I think you may be back again on mute, as I can see.
I haven't changed anything from before. If
Or
I do, can you hear me now? Why can't they hear me? I'm speaking into this.
While we're working out the technical issues, maybe I can just.
Robin, a point of order. If we've sent Councillor Pettengill away, we can't just do a general presentation. He needs to be present for that.
That's correct. So I am suggesting that the general presentation proceed with our staff.
Okay.
I'm still here. Yeah, wasn't clear what was happening yet, so hadn't left yet.
I don't know. Can people hear me?
Councillor Herford? Yes, I can hear you now, but yeah, Councillor Herford.
And sorry, in my potential conflict would be on item 25, to be clear.
25. Very good. Thank you. Then please proceed, Mr. Vilaniskis, and we will come back to these items in which we may have to have some of our members excuse themselves.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So normally my presentation style is not much of a presentation. We produce this list of all of the active applications, and we highlight the priority files. So those are highlighted in yellow. And then I usually would give an overview of the priority files and solicit council's questions or feedback on any of the other applications. So perhaps if we could leave the ones that have conflict till the end and deal with all of the other applications, would that work?
That might be most convenient. I see one of the items where one of our members is in conflict is one of those priority files.
So I can leave that
we're a little
yeah.
out of practice in receiving this particular presentation. We'll be doing it again this fall, I expect. But then I will unless you had any further remarks, Mr. Vilaniskis, I will open it up and we'll just be mindful of the items that have been indicated, and that is item 11, TUP 66, item 14, waterfront landing, and item 16, or mainly 25, concerning the Eagle Run area application. These, some of our members have indicated potential conflict.
Perfect.
So perhaps we'll let you then treat these ones that you've highlighted, Mr. Vilaniskis.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So on the agenda is the overall list of active development applications that we have in the planning department. So it doesn't include, engineering applications or building permits or any other applications that are not in planning sphere. So we do have 5 priority projects, which is the maximum amount under our policy. The first one is a delegated development permit for flood hazard. It is associated with a forming character DP that council has already approved, and a housing agreement for a project at 3968 Government Road. It's in the MUD 1 zone, so they just, in addition to a forming character DP, they needed a flood hazard development permit, and so that is already gone through the process, and we're just getting ready to issue it. The second priority project is at Waterfront Landing. That's DP 540. This is a forming character application for 195.
Excuse me, Mr. Valeniscus. Councillor Race has indicated he may be in conflict on this one. If you may then proceed to the next item in your planned list.
Yes. So the next one after that is DP 539. This is a development permit application on government roads. This is the application that's within the property that contains the Brackendale General Store and the Crab Apple Cafe. This is an application for mixed-use buildings with 28 market rental units. So all of the units all the residential units are market rental. The application is currently under review, and it's one of the applications that is subject to the online public information meeting. So we have 3 projects that are going through that process, and this is one of them. The next priority project after that is DP 530. Again, it is also in Brackendale on Government Road. I will skip through that due to conflict. The next one is DP 517. This is on 3rd Avenue. This is a market rental building with 67 units that council has already approved the development permit. We are now working with the applicant on conditions required to issue the development permit and then acquire the building permit. The next one after that is DP 509. It's also a permit that council has issued, and we're just working with the applicant on conditions of issuance for that development permit. This is in the north end of the business park in the MUD 1 zone. It's 38 residential market rental units. And I believe that's it. That's it for the active projects. In addition to the active projects, I do have a list of projects that are out of that priority process pipeline, but they're in construction. I don't know if council wanted to see a quick update on those projects as well. If so, I could share my screen, and I have a little table summarizing those.
Mr. Valeniscus, we have good, healthy time here, I believe, so perhaps I'll suggest that you do just that.
Okay.
You have that screen handy and relatively efficiently? There we go.
Can you guys see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So here at the bottom, you'll see the active priority projects. So these are the 5 projects we just went over. They represent 364 rental units, and out of those, 55 are affordable rental units. In terms of past priority projects, we have the Buckley Avenue, that's the district BC Housing Partnership project. The DP and the building permit have been issued. There's been some site prep that's been done recently, and we're just waiting for a final commitment from BC Housing before proceeding with that project. So that's 76 affordable units. The seniors housing project on 3rd Avenue is well underway. Building permit issued, and another project is under construction. That's 232 affordable units. The building permit has also been issued a long time ago now for the under one roof project on 3rd Avenue, which has 44 supportive and affordable units. And finally, the market rental project in the MUD 1 zone with 40 units is also building permit issued and construction underway. Those are all of the active kind of in process projects that have already left the priority timeline. And that is it.
Thank you. Council, we should have time for a number of questions, briefly preferable regarding any item on the list here, and I'll just review again the ones that we're going to come back to later, as some councillors may be in conflict, is TUB 66, Development Permit 541, Waterfront Landing, and at Eagle Run Development Permit 530. That's item number 25, that last one. Questions, Council? Councillor Herford? Or Councillor Race? All right. I just want to, is it a point of order, or I'll just proceed then with Councillor Herford? Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. When are we going to be receiving a update on the electronic public information meeting? I think I saw that on a planner. Is that soon, and could you comment on, have thoughts on it at this point?
Is that Linda? Do you want to? Okay, I'll pass it over to Linda.
Please, Ms. Glenday.
Thank you. Timely question. That update will be provided this afternoon as part of the EOC update, given the change in the ministerial order that we just received last Thursday.
If I could also add, if the question was about the electronic information, public information meetings, then we are planning to come back in July and give an update, because the 3 projects that were selected for that process, some of them have already finished. So like Garibaldi Springs, I believe, finished now. The other ones are still active, and so the end date, that 30-day period for the last of the 3 projects, is in early July, and so we expect mid-July to come back to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. That addresses that portion of my questions. I'll
very good.
Over to Laura.
Race, followed by Mayor Elliott.
Thank you. Mine is with respect to item number 3 on the list, which is the Harbor Air oceanfront floatplane dock. And first of all, it indicates in the details that that's a delegated development permit. And I wonder if you could, first of all, just confirm that, and then I'll have a comment on that.
Yes. Thank you for the question. So that is a permit for a formal character permit for a dock, and is deemed delegated. We normally do the kind of if the application is just for a dock or an access ramp down to the water, it's deemed as delegated under our procedures bylaw.
So, if I might share, so the concern I have is perhaps not the dock, but the float planes that might tie up to it, and the landing and the takeoff, and where that might happen, and noise issues, potential conflict issues with other users in that area, wind sports, small craft, perhaps even commercial vessels and so forth. And do we have jurisdiction over the blind channel, and we might land an airplane there, for example?
Through you, Chair. So the application is just for a dock. There will be no landing and takeoff in the channel. As we understand it, the applicants, Harbor Air, are planning to do all of the landing takeoff in the sound, so it will be out in the much more wider open area, not in the blind channel, and then the airplanes would float in to the channel to dock. The use is a permitted use on that property. Our zoning bylaw does not restrict docks to just float planes. So we've been in discussions, our staff have been in discussions, I think, with the marine users, or they're preparing to, as part of this application review. At this point, it's a chartered service, so it wouldn't be regular flights. I think the intent is to sort of test the market in Squamish for float plane service. But there's no anticipated impact yet on the other users. But as I said, our staff are going to do, or are in the process of doing, the consultation with stakeholders.
and who, just my final follow-up, and who, is it Transport Canada that would set the, where the takeoff and landing might occur, like which part of the sound, for example, and what areas?
I believe so.
Do they have a public process, a consultation process? And the reason I'm asking all this is because I think in some discussions we had with some of the wind sports people over the spit renovation, we talked about the idea of getting a bit more of a comprehensive plan for the oceanfront about who can go where. And I had discussions years ago, actually my first term, with some of the wind sport representatives about conflicts with small craft traffic coming in out of the harbor and wind sports, and thinking of buoying off certain areas and so forth. And so we really haven't kind of pulled that together. Now this is an additional potential use here. And I'm just wondering what the best way to deal with that is to get the other people sort of on side with the float plane and where they should be and where they shouldn't be. And so they can adjust their schedules accordingly, or their traffic accordingly.
Yes, and that's the intent of consulting with all the other users. So I know that wind sports is certainly a society that we're reaching out to, as well as the kind of more industrial users in that part of the blind channel.
Okay, but they actually won't be in the blind channel except for the actual mooring.
That's right. I think the float plane, the dock is going in a similar area where there used to be pilings that were recently taken out on kind of like the very tip of the oceanfront. So that shouldn't be an issue for marine traffic, because it will be replacing what was there. But they will, the part of the process will be getting Transport Canada approval as well.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Other questions offhand here? Mayor Elliott?
Thank you. There's a number of these applications that have to do with the business park. I'm not going to speak to the one that Councillor Pettengill is in conflict in, but are these not all being dealt with under the business zoning bylaw? Or are these some of the problems we're trying to solve with the zoning bylaw?
Through you, Chair. Yes, that's right. So we have a number of applications in the business park that are related to the zoning bylaw update. Some of those users have applied for temporary use permits to get through this period of determination for the district in terms of what we're gonna land on. And so far, we've been supportive of very short periods for those businesses. Some of the other applications are, they're rezonings or development permits, and the applicants have decided to go ahead and apply regardless of whether the process is going on or not.
Okay. For item number 7, this is the split lot on Queensway, and it has 108 residential units over 37 ground level light industrial units. And I know this is our mud zone and we're trying to keep it a transitional zone, but there's no office in there. The ratio of residential to job creating space seems totally skewed. And I'm just trying to understand, we wanted a really vibrant sort of mixed use area, and this one is very heavily weighted in terms of residential without that acknowledgement that, you see all these other applications where people are looking for office space near the business park. We don't want to give them office space in the light industrial space to protect that. But then this in the mud zone actually is where we could have office space, and there's none in it. So is our mud zone hitting the mark yet, or are we missing something there?
Through you, Chair. So the application on that property for DP 547, it meets the zoning requirements. So that means that there is quite a bit of employment space in order to accommodate that 108 residential units. There's going to be mezzanine office in those spaces. I'm not sure if it's going to be all of them or not, but it's meeting the zoning requirements. There's no variance request other than I think there's a 1 meter height request. So it's hard to have that conversation with the applicants because they're, it's a fairly new zone, and they're doing what's required of them. They're using the density bonus system, so they're providing some rental in order to bump up that residential aspect.
But I thought our mud zone allowed for office use.
It does allow it in certain parcels. Let me just pull up to refresh on the permitted uses. I know there's 3 different areas in the mud zone, and the more south you go, the more industrial it becomes. So this would be, the property would be split into 2 areas, Area 3 and Area 2. And Area 3 for sure allows for office on the upper floors. Area 2, Area 2 allows for minor office space on the 2nd floor as well. So, but it also allows for light industrial base. And I think that whether it's hitting the mark or not is yet to be seen. What we're doing right now is we're coming up with an implementation strategy for the employment space model results. Now that we have a model, we're looking at, how does this affect individual applications? And I think what we're seeing is that office space, actually the supply of office space is fairly healthy if developments that are projected to be going into construction in the next 5 years are going to happen. So I think that it's a little early for me to say whether the industrial, light industrial base in this mixed-use development are a better or worse than having some sort of commercial industrial space with office on top.
Mm-hmm. My last question for now is, in those priority projects, we saw that our first sort of 5 skewed very heavily towards affordable housing on the rental side. And this latest group is skewed very heavily towards market rental. And I'm wondering if staff have thought about how we try and balance that a little bit more so that there's affordable units in every development rather than just market rental.
Yeah, it's interesting. The current projects, if we look at it, the past projects, a lot, there's quite a bit of public funding in those projects and public partnership. In the list of current projects, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. All of them are privately funded. So I think that's the difference. I think that it's, with Waterfront Landing, which was a rezoning, we are getting the 55 affordable units. The other projects, I don't believe, have gone through a rezoning process recently. So without a zoning process, it's very hard to leverage that. And I think as time goes on and our rezonings catch up to the development permit stage, we might see the swing the other way.
Thank you.
Further questions? I'll have one at this time then. Mr. Valiniskas, this may be a question for Gary Buxton, I'm not sure, or the engineering department. I note that in reading through, I counted 5 homes and 3 commercial buildings, or 3 larger buildings downtown. 5 homes on Wilson Crescent, 3 larger buildings on 2nd and 3rd Avenue downtown that are likely destined for demolition. And my general question applying to all of these, and maybe I've missed some others here, is where are we at in encouraging, in our dialogue with these developers, green demolition? These are homes that are built prior to the use of asbestos. They're in very good condition as regards sound wood that could be recycled. But I know it's a growing concern even among the neighbors who make this observation and people conscious of these types of issues. And I may just put it to you for delivery later as far as comment, but to both of you, Mr. Buxton, Mr. Valeniscus, but where are we at on green demolition?
Through the chair, Gary Buxton here. That's one of our priorities for our solid waste specialists to work on this year. Whether or not we're at the point of having a policy or a bylaw in place, I would have to check in with Mr. Pickett on that one. But it certainly, there is nothing in place at present, but it is one of our priorities with respect to dealing with our solid waste stream this year.
Thank you. Further questions, Council? Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was sitting there with my hand up for a while and not realizing my camera was off. With regards to the rezonings, I recognize that with the development permit, we're working on zoning bylaw rewrites and our community climate action plan and so on will be impacting that. But with the rezonings, we have more immediate influence with regards to our newer policy. So I'm just wondering what sort of conversations we're having with developers around expectations for rezonings at this point. In terms of, the newer policy we've passed, like our climate action policy.
Through you, Chair. So certainly we are having conversations on, especially on energy source. We're still in the implementation stage for the BC Building Code. So I think the expectation at the moment is that the developers that are in the rezoning process now, are likely by the time they hit building permitting stage, they will be building to in many cases the highest level of the step code. And so our conversations now are about energy source.
Okay, thank you. And then I just want to, a specific question, item 15, and it's lot line adjustments related to wood fiber LNG. And I'm just wondering if that is a discretionary, it's an SD, I can't remember what SD stands for.
Subdivision.
A subdivision. Is that a discretionary item, or that is one we are required to provide?
No, usually it's a highly regulated process, so it's kind of like a permitting process in many cases. There's very little discretion in subdivision. In this instance, if this was a bigger subdivision, there are different sections of the Land Title Act that can give some discretion to the approving officer. But in lot line adjustments, there isn't that much leverage.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I'll bring up one then regarding two rezoning applications for Wilson Crescent. These are items number 21 and 51. They are both happen to be on the southerly side of the Wilson Crescent circuit. But nonetheless, I'd like to ask a question that arises out of the microplan for the Wilson Crescent neighborhood. That microplan mentions the slough, which is formerly the east branch of the Squamish River. It goes by different names. Wilson Crescent Slough will do. Now, given that slough is highlighted in the plan as an asset, an attribute of the neighborhood, and I just ask at a high level, is it possible that attention to remediation works in the slough could be considered as part of the rezoning community amenity contribution negotiation? And I'll just give a specific idea. The culvert under Buckley Avenue is not working properly. It's often clogged. In fact, the district staff have built a pad to come in and do maintenance with machinery, and it's not done often enough. We don't have time to do it. It really does need an assessment, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of other funding pockets to address this. So my general question is it possible for the community amenity contribution negotiations out of either or both of these developments to address environmental projects in the slough?
Yes, certainly. would be possible simply because it is something that is contained in the neighborhood plan. I know, on one of these applications, 21, we're fairly early in the process. We're still having discussions about the type of housing in that area with the applicant. And the other one is, did you say it was number 55?
That was number 51, 1145, 1155, and 1165 Wilson Crescent.
Yes, so that one is a bit on a pause. We're waiting for information from the applicant, essentially, at this stage. That project, we were targeting affordable housing as a suggested contribution, but we are yet to have current discussions with the applicant.
Thank you. It is an asset for the neighborhood too. In addition to being an environmental attribute, it's also a part of the green landscape of the neighborhood. Mayor Elliott.
Chair.
Oh, I'm not sure who's calling. Is it Councillor Ray?
Thanks. Yes, just to get on the list somewhere.
Oh, thank you. Mayor Elliott.
I'm just wondering if we're leaving time to talk about the community planning projects, or if I should ask those questions now or wait.
Council, I've actually thought to blend them together, and they in fact do overlap with each other. So, Mayor Elliott, my suggestion was to be, please go ahead with the questions on that section.
Okay, thank you. With regard to the cemetery master plan, Mr. Valeniskis, it says adoption by council expected in Q2, but we're near the end of that. So is that?
Yes.
I think that was supposed to read Q3.
Through you, Chair, yes, so it could be Q3. I just spoke to Elaine as I was finalizing this list, and although they hope to do it in Q2, it is likely that it will come in Q3.
And then that next line item, the Tempest and Prospero implementation, is this your actual development module, or is this still implementation of other modules?
No, this will be planning and building and business licensing.
Okay. And then the sub-area plan for Loggers East is anticipated first reading in July, but you're not on my agenda planner yet, so it's pretty crowded. So I'm just wondering if that's something that you are still planning to bring in July, or whether that will come in September.
We are hoping to bring it in July, but agenda is always the tricky part of getting to council. So,
you didn't just see Robin Arthur's face, but anyway, I did. Okay. And then following up on that, we've got sub-area planning for Garibaldi Estates, and is that a final decision, or is that a decision that will be made with council?
That is not the final decision. Council still will have to approve it. It's just on there because it's number one on our list in the official community plan. And when we put that list together, we did consider, which one should go first. We are certainly seeing a lot of interest in rezonings in that area, and we've been putting a pause on that.
Yeah, fair enough. And I wonder too, when the sub-area plan for Loggers East comes back, if we can spend some time talking about lessons learned from that process, and just leave some time in the staff report, some space to talk about what we did, what we might do differently going forward. I think that would be helpful to council. Thank you, Chair.
Really?
I see Mr. Valeniskis has noted that. Councillor Race, I apologize for missing you earlier.
No, not a problem. It was back to the point that was raised by Councillor Pettengill, and I just had a question about the heat source, the discussion that came up with Mr. Valeniskis. And I might have missed something, but do we have a policy that dictates preferences for one heat source over another heat source or energy source? Like gas versus electricity, for example. And the reason I ask that is because depending on which way you look at it, one affects emissions and the other one affects affordability. And I'm just curious about whether or not we've ever made a decision that way.
Well, it is, carbon neutrality is certainly all through our OCP policy and the climate action plan. We are balancing the possibilities. So, our understanding is for multifamily, lower density multifamily, it's fairly easy to go electric. And with today's efficiency in building envelope, the actual heating costs are not that greater. Just because the buildings are much more efficient and so they're taking less energy to heat. For the higher density multifamily, it's something that's still unresolved in terms of what is a possible best energy source, because those buildings rely on hot water heating with gas. It's simply too expensive to try and do it. It's not impossible, all electric. But we do have policy to support that transition into carbon neutral heating systems.
So before I leave this, so in effect, it is voluntary on the part of the developer still, one way or the other? Is it their choice?
Well, it's always voluntary for developers. But with rezoning, we have a little more leverage to make sure that we, get to the best system for the district's objectives as well. But we are being cautious in that, the technology is not yet readily available for some of the bigger buildings to go completely carbon neutral.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. I'd like to circle back on item number 3, the Harbor Air application. That's definitely the one that jumped out at me, and I appreciate we've had some conversation on it, thanks to Councillor Race, but I'm still not entirely clear what the process is. So I appreciate that it's just a DP for the dock itself, but even if the planes are taking off and landing further out in Howe Sound, they're still motoring into dock. So there's an additional type of craft, marine craft, that is using that area. And so how do we start to address that potential user conflict in that fairly small space?
Through you, Chair. So we are starting those conversations with the users in the area, but also recognizing that, we have a limited role to play, especially at the development permit stage, for something that is largely regulated by Transport Canada, especially when it comes to airplane takeoff and landing. That is 100% federal jurisdiction. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. We're trying to address it by consultation at this point. Our understanding is that the service they're proposing is going to be very limited at this time. They're really just testing the market, and so there's no near future plans for regular service. This would be all just chartered planes.
Follow-up?
I'm sorry, were you finished, Councillor Stone, or did you have a follow-up? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So 2 things on that. One, appreciate the takeoff and landing as Transport Canada, but I'm curious about how far our jurisdiction goes out to from foreshore into the waterway, if at all. And then also in terms of noise regulation, so if they were anticipated to go to a more regular scheduled flight, which tools do we have in our toolbox to start regulating something like that in terms of use or activity?
Through you, Chair, very little. Again, it's marine navigation. So in terms of land use regulations, what we're looking at is a dock that could either have boats or float planes attached to it. There's not really any distinction that we can make from a regulatory perspective. We're just looking at form and character of a dock and, parking requirements and things like that. It is, I believe, all in the federal jurisdiction.
Mayor Elliott.
So I'm just going to follow on that with, we have a phase development agreement with this land developer that outlined pretty much everything that was going to happen down there and what uses were allowed. And this wasn't one of them. And I find it strange that they can propose an airport use without consulting the community on that, and that our only jurisdiction is over the dock. There's a lot of implications here that our community hasn't had an opportunity to consider. And it's not captured in our phase development agreement that float planes was a permitted use for this development. So I am a little bit confused about how this goes ahead without the input of council or the community for that matter. And at this time, I'm not commenting one way or the other. I'm just really confused about putting a new use on the oceanfront that wasn't contemplated.
If I may respond through the chair. The use is a permitted use on that property. So docks are permitted in, I think it's block H. And the definition for docks in our zoning bylaw include float planes or tie-up for float planes. So I think that when we adopted the sub-area plan, you know, it provided a general picture of what that development will look like, but it wasn't detailed enough to show the particular uses. And obviously, at that point, you know, it might not have been envisioned that a float plane dock will be there, but the zoning bylaw does allow for that use in that zone.
Well, I would suggest that the developer and the proponent need to be much more transparent with our community on this issue and do some public engagement, because having it just appear on a spreadsheet to council, I think, is not genuinely being open with the community about what's happening down there.
Further questions, council?
Yeah, and maybe I'm belaboring the point, but I just, you know, I wonder too if we have some jurisdiction in terms of fuel storage or aviation fuel storage or fueling as permitted uses or activities on the site, and if there are tools in our toolbox, if the community has concerns.
So there's nothing in terms of fueling unless they've proposed to build a fueling station, which I'd have to check the zoning bylaw to see if it may allow for marine fueling, but it's not what they're proposing. So we are in the process of engaging with the stakeholders in the area, including the Wind Sports Society and the industrial users, and we'll see what comes out of it.
Thank you, Mr. Veliniskas. I have a couple of questions to offer concerning the planning activity items. The zoning bylaw update, its phasing, part of the program will be clarifying industrial zones, and I'm just wondering, I didn't see it explicitly referenced, and I do appreciate that in our circumstances we're all facing today, that all of our work plans have gone haywire, but I just wondered whether what you might comment on as regards where that fits into the phasing of the zoning bylaw update, the clarifying of industrial zones.
Thank you, Chair. That's a really good question. That is in phase 2. Yes.
Thank you. Another question in that same section, and it concerns the employment space modeling, and you've already referred to it, that we're looking forward to an implementation plan now that we have this model and seeing and testing how we can apply it to individual projects. Do you anticipate that an implementation plan will come back to council?
Yes, absolutely. So once we're done drafting the plan, we'll certainly bring it to council for approval before we start implementing it. We are softly implementing the employment land or space model results into different applications. But I think we need an agreed upon direction with council in order to fully implement it.
Thank you. Further questions, council? Councillor Pettingill.
I think earlier
Well, sorry, Chair. Doug again. Just put me on the list. Thank you.
I think earlier in COVID, we heard that we hadn't seen a change in the number of applications come in. I understand our staff have been working really hard to adjust and process applications, but in terms of what's coming in now, have we seen any change, or is it just kind of business as usual in terms of stuff coming in?
I think it seems to be business as usual at this point. We're very busy on the building permitting side of things, so we haven't seen any slowdown there. And I think things are sort of getting back to normal with development applications. There was a little, immediate lull as things seem to go on pause for a couple of weeks or a month. But we haven't seen really a slowdown in applications yet.
Further questions?
Yes, Chair.
Excuse me, Councillor Race, please.
Thank you. I'm sorry, this is my last comment on the seaplane thing, because the thing that worries me is the flight path and the landing and takeoff flight path. And I'm not a pilot, but having watched these things and tied up at a dock next to the terminal in Victoria and so forth, when they're landing, of course, they're more in glide mode, and so they're just not as noisy as when they're taking off, when they're flat out with the throttle, and then they really rattle windows. So on a normal day, if they were taking off in the afternoon, they'd start at the north and they'd go towards the south away from the town. And if they were landing, they'd come in over the town somehow or over the blind channel and kind of coast down, it seems to me as a layperson. But if it's an outflow wind, which it can be here even in the summertime early in the morning, and presumably they'd be taking off, going back towards the town in a northerly direction into the wind. And who knows what kind of a racket that would make over what part of town. And so I don't know what tools, well, we talked about what tools we have or don't have, but what input we have with Transport Canada about regulating the flight path. We had a discussion about the airport flight path and the complaints we had around that and changes that have been made over the years. And I'm just wondering if we have the same type of input with Transport Canada, if these flight paths are going to kind of affect the ambience of the oceanfront development, which will one day be residential and light commercial and so forth, as well as the downtown area, which I'm a little bit worried about if these things start taking off in another direction. So I'll leave it at that. Maybe this is just not the time to decide all of this stuff, but that is another one of those concerns that I have.
Thank you, Councillor Race. I'd like to mention an issue in relation to DP 539 at the Brackendale store. That's item number 17 on the list. And that is to ask whether there has been an environmental assessment requested of the developer. And my reason for asking is that for us old-timers, we remember that that was a gas station. It was a Shell station for 20, 30 years at least. And the neighbors in the area are curious because they don't recall how or whether the fuel tanks in the ground may have been addressed. So that's one issue. Of course, it's also near an important riparian zone, the Cottonwood Creek. So I just ask whether that will be forthcoming for council's review or for your staff review, an environmental assessment.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's two types of environmental assessments that are necessary for that property. So one is the site profile, which gets submitted to us with every development permit application, and that deals with any contaminants on site. So the proponent has to essentially confirm that whether there was any contamination, and then if there was, that it has been cleaned up. And then the second environmental assessment is for riparian areas. That property is adjacent to some sensitive ecosystems, and there have been reports done to that regard as well.
Thank you. Other questions, Council? I do have a couple of issues. There are two development projects or applications in our list here which involve heritage buildings or features which have been noted as such in staff reports to council. One of them is at Scott Crescent, and I'm not here referring to the archaeological site, but to the heritage pilings that are there, and they were discussed during the public hearing and in letters to the staff and the staff correspondence with council. Those pilings have Squamish Nation relationships going back 4 generations. We know a lot about them and who installed them and all that sort of stuff. The second example is the Jack Brackendale store, the project I just mentioned, DP 539. And I'll use that one as an example for my question, or in highlighting the fact that we do not have policy to guide staff, as most municipalities of our size seem to these days. And I do recognize that many municipalities have only recently developed such policy, but nonetheless, we don't have it to my knowledge, that when such a development application comes forward, that a heritage review or assessment can be requested as a matter of policy. So the last time a developer produced a heritage review for a building, for example, was in 2011. It was the United Church. They did that voluntarily, of course, as part of their project development. So it occurs to me that there's some arbitrariness here, or some potential arbitrariness, that I'm sure that staff itself would not be comfortable with. Here at the Brackendale store, it's a wet area, and there are pumps in the basement of that building that are working many, many days of the year. And so what is the condition of that building? And that is a question that's 104 years old, and this will always arise and would be one of the issues addressed in a heritage review that would be requested of a developer, the condition of the feature or building. So my question is, are you in a position as the planning department today, can you request a heritage review for a given feature or a building without, in the absence of policies such as exist elsewhere?
Great question. Yes, I believe we can in some cases when there's merit for it and there's some leverage or discretion on the district's part, such as a variance. In the Brackendale store proposal, they are not proposing to do any changes to that building, and so we have not requested any review. They're just proposing to add to it, to the property.
Thank you. Really, I guess the real reason I'm asking is that it would appear that it's a very important issue for the proposal, introduces and responds to a lot of constraints that are important considerations. I'll leave it at that. Council, any further questions? Then I would like to return to the Harbour Air item. That's number 3 in our list. Just with a general observation that there's other proposals out there too, or ideas or needs. And in the very last item, I think it is, that addresses the Marine Action Strategy implementation, there's a reference to marine infrastructure. And of course, this is just one example of marine infrastructure that we're going to have to be or will be confronted with in the next while. So, and again, I'll repeat the fact that we're all aware here on council that of the constraints and the burdens for staff's work planning with our current COVID situation, among other things. But we really do need to return to some holistic assessment of our marine infrastructure needs. I am aware that Harbour Air is entertaining, is in conversations with ferry concepts as well, electric driven. So these are all of the things that we need to review in a holistic way. I am very pleased to hear your review of the different stakeholder groups that you'd want to reach out to. But these are stakeholder groups that were also part of the Marine Action Strategy. And it's now a few years ago, but a lot of these jurisdictional things and what Transport Canada says and what we can do, they were all addressed in MAST Phase 1 that was coordinated by our real estate department. So when we have a chance, I think it'd be very beneficial for the waterfront and all projects there that we return to that challenge of a holistic assessment of our needs. And I'll just finally note that in the report there is a reference to, and I quote, consultant support. I was curious as to what aspects. I don't need an answer for that today, but I would like to suggest that that would be a good idea. There are consultants out there, specialists in marine planning, that could answer readily and give good advice on marine infrastructure issues. I'll leave it at that, but I think that it's healthy that we've had a number of us here on council focus on that particular project. I think it introduces a lot of key issues and important ones for all of us. Further questions,
Chair,
Council? Mayor Elliott?
Mr. Buxton has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see everybody here. Please go ahead, Mr. Buxton.
Sorry, that was from earlier with respect to the heritage policy, but Mr. Valeniskis has answered that question.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill, we still have a couple of minutes, perhaps?
Yeah, I didn't have any more questions. I just did have a bit of a closing comment. I don't know if now's the time to start that or...
Please.
Okay, so appreciate, I mean, I'm sort of just surprised by the amount of work that's still happening during COVID. It's sort of an overwhelming amount of work. I'm very appreciative of that. The one thing that jumped out at me is mention that we are softly implementing some of the initial outcomes of the employment land strategy, if I understood the words correctly. And I just, one of the things I think I brought up in those discussions is I believe there is a bit of a disconnect still between what different people mean when they talk about office versus light industrial, what we understand, and the feedback during that discussion, I think, was that as the public engagement on the employment land use strategy continues and so on, there'd be further dialogue to understand needs better and so on. So I'm not proposing that we stand still, but I just want to highlight that I think there is some disconnects there still, and just look forward to seeing the ongoing conversations with the zoning bylaw rewrite, and hopefully we can nail down some of the confusion and clarify some of that stuff.
Thank you. Not seeing any further hands up. Any further comments? Then perhaps it's time we move on to our last segment of the agenda. Thank you very much, Mr. Valeniskis and Mr. Buxton. And we'll look forward to the next one. And I thank you all for your patience. We'll be in better rehearsal for next time around when we do this particular project again.
That was good, Jonas. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item is a report from Ms. Glenday on the COVID-19 facilities. An update. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to introduce this item. We have on deck, following my introduction, Devin Guest and Natasha Goldbeck, Devin from Recreation. And the main purpose of this presentation is to speak to our longer-term opening of our recreation facilities and what that looks like. Ms. Guest has done a great job of aligning the opening with the provincial phases so that there are actual technical thresholds for when we're able to open, as well as our capacity to meet all of the protocols required. Before Ms. Guest starts, though, I do want to have Robin Arthurs speak. As you know, last Thursday, there was a new ministerial order about public attendance at council and public hearings, as well as an update on bylaw readings. We've done, or Robin actually has done, Ms. Arthurs has done as much research as she can in terms of the information that's been provided. So she's going to give us an update, or give you an update on that. And before she starts, I'll also mention that our longer-term planning around this particular item, in addition to Municipal Hall and aligning its larger capacity opening with the provincial phases, is underway and was timed based on our last endorsed plan from Council revisiting public appearance in September. So that work is happening. but Robin will speak to the impact of this new ministerial order may or may not have until then.
Thank you, Chair. Robin Arthurs, General Manager, Corporate Services. On
Robin, may I ask just if you could raise your volume as best you can? We can hear you, but it's just a little bit faint in the background.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
That should be good. Yes,
Oh, okay.
please.
Sorry, I just moved the mic. The mic was away. So on Thursday, the province issued Ministerial Order 192, which replaces Ministerial Order 139, which provided for how municipal governments or local governments conduct their business during the COVID crisis and the state of emergency. It's an update to that. And staff have basically had about 3 working days to try and wrap our minds around what the new order implications mean and determine the elements which will be put into place going forward as we develop a safety plan of how to open up to the public for our council meetings. So right now, as council is aware, we've been heavily focused on our phase 2 restart, but staff have still been looking forward to phase 3, and this will be injected into our phase 3 planning, as well as sort of hitting our phase 2 right now, tail end. It's important to remember that even with the new health order, which I'll go over some of the elements, or the ministerial order, the health orders that are in effect still prevail. So that means things like regulations around how many people are at events, distancing requirements, and what that means for our council chamber. So that'll be part of what's going to come forward. And the other thing that was in there is what will be happening with our public hearings. The ministry didn't really consider public hearings as part of this order, and our abilities around determining the numbers of people that attend at a public hearing, so not more than 50 and it becomes an event. So we don't want to be jeopardizing any of our hearings by not being able to accommodate people. And as council is aware, staff, including IT, communications, planning, and legislative services, have been working to ensure that public electronic participation is in place. We have a DVP coming on the 21st that we want the public to be able to participate, if not, some forms of participation before then, in the forms of delegations, if that comes up. And we also have a public hearing plan for the 28th, which is large and encompasses dozens of bylaws. So the one thing is the new order does not mean that we have to jeopardize or forego any existing plans that we have around those hearings. So we can continue on business as usual. Some of the next steps include development of a resolution on what meetings and live meetings that are open to the public will look like. And it also has to describe the measures that we're able to take to ensure openness for the electronic participation. So we're just in the process of developing that right now. And our plan is to come back on July 7th with this resolution fully baked, for lack of a better term, so that we don't rush it and bring it twice, so to speak. One of the things that we will be considering for September is, do we move our meetings? Do we implement kiosk situations for public participation that might be at a separate venue? The order tells us that our electronic meeting participation has to resemble, and that's the word that's in the order, our in-person meeting. So we actually have to really take a look at how we set this up now as we return to opening up for the public. Now, an added wrinkle, you might already know this, is that Attorney General David Eby announced today, as a result of yesterday, the adoption of the new Emergency Measures Act related to COVID-19, that they will be extending the provincial state of emergency for up to another year. So this clashes a little bit with what the ministerial order that was put into place last week says with opening meetings. So staff have a lot of work ahead to try and figure out how we get the public back into our meetings, because that is right now, from corporate officer standpoint, the priority. So stand by, and we will be bringing more information and on what our best efforts are going to look like as far as bringing forward public meetings. One of the other changes, though, that came with this ministerial order is they are rescinding the ability to adopt bylaws in the same day as they have the first 3 readings, with the exception of certain kinds of financial planning documents and budget documents. So those still will stand, but the other ones now require the 2 to 3 meeting process that was in place in the Local Government Act and the Community Charter. So I think that's pretty much it for right now as far as the new order goes, but we will have a more fulsome update as well as a resolution for council that might be meaty and long in place for the 7th, all right?
Chair?
Thank you. Ms. Guest, did you wish to? Council, do we have any questions for staff?
Chair?
Councillor Brent? Oh, am I missing?
Yep, Mayor Elliott must not be on your screen.
I'm not seeing you on my screen, but please go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to add some additional context, is that the mayors have been pushing back on the province that these kinds of changes that arrive on a Thursday without any notice or without consultation to local government are not really sort of in the spirit of an all-government approach to responding to this pandemic. It creates confusion, and it creates a lot of just-in-time work for our staff, which isn't fair given the current conditions. So I just want council to know that we are pushing back and asking the government to please do a bit more consultation prior to making changes to ministerial order, or at least giving staff advance notice so that they can start to put these changes into their planning cycles and their work cycles, rather than sort of panicking a few days before a council meeting and having to try and put something together, which you've done a very good job today, Ms. Arthurs, but it's not really the spirit of how we want to move forward with the province. And so I just wanted to add that context, that feedback has been provided.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. Councillor French, did you have a question or comment here? Very good. Any other questions or comments on this presentation, this update? Thank you to Ms. Arthurs, Ms. Guest. Now I will entertain a motion to close, I take it, because we will be reopening to complete our closed meeting. Is that correct, Mayor Elliott?
There's a significant amount of detail that hasn't been provided yet on the COVID recreation services aspect of.
Oh, excuse me. Then we're back to Ms. Glenday?
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Sorry, I can't see everybody from where I am right now. Please go ahead, Ms. Glenday.
So I believe at this point we're going to the recreation presentation, is that correct?
Or have I got an out-of-date agenda in front of me? as you recommend, please go ahead. I've got your COVID-19 facilities update. Would that be you, Ms. Guest?
Yes, it would be. Thank you. I'll share my screen now.
Thank you.
everyone see the full screen, or are you seeing presenter mode?
Presenter mode.
Presenter mode.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to update you and the community on our recreation services facilities and programming restart. For those of you in attendance, my name is Devin Guest, and I'm the Acting Director of Recreation Services here at the District of Squamish. To provide Mayor and Council some context in the research that has gone into this overall plan, the BC Restart Plan, the COVID-19 going forward strategy, the BC RPA's Recreation and Park Sector Guidelines for restarting operations, the WorkSafe BC guideline, as well as one addition, the Via Sport Return to Sport plan. All of these have contributed insight, guidance, and a general move forward strategy for the recreation sector, both across the Lower Mainland and BC. When staff were starting to turn their lens to the longer term, we looked at formulating criteria for resuming service and facility operations. The planning and decision-making process to restart, pardon me, I just need to move some things, are based on the following 4 criteria. Reopening of facilities and programs may occur if all 4 criteria are met. The ability to comply with a provincial health order, reasonable public demand for service, financial viability, and employee and public safety. Additional considerations are flexibility and scalability as we anticipate second waves, and really understanding and having good communication with our neighbors, both through the Sea to Sky corridor and those in the Lower Mainland. We also, Recreation Services also likes to turn their service priorities through the social lens. And some of our top 3 social priorities right now are supporting parents' return to economy through childcare, the vulnerable population through therapeutic services, and that is our, specifically our NeuroFit program, and utilizing assistance programs to maximize access to service, which we'll get into a little bit further along in the presentation. So how did we look at moving forward? We came up with a five levels of recreation service, and step 1 and 2 of the service restoration continuum are characterized by the reopening of outdoor park amenities and the restoration of some indoor services such as the showers and washrooms listed as critical. Steps 3 and 4 are characterized by the reopening of community facilities and the restoration of a broader range of programs and services. And step 5 really reflects a future state of program and service delivery where restrictions are lifted to maximize the access and participation while maintaining appropriate levels of health and safety measures. In the following slides, we'll take you through more specifics of our service delivery. So within the 5-step REC continuum, I have overlaid the province of BC's restart phases. So you will see as we move on in the forthcoming slides is that our 1 through 5 levels flex and are agile to be interpreted within the 4 phases of the province's restart program.
So Brennan Park, as kind of like the base or the facility of recreation services, is in level 2 right now and anticipated to move to level 3 with the province shortly. Level 3 would be defined by summer camps being offered, with the majority of settings being outside. NeuroFit particularly is brought back into the facility to continue to support an at-risk population. The municipal campground opens, as well as some front counter service to facilitate the campground, showers, and washroom amenities. Sports fields return to modified play. Turning our lens to September, the arena opens for modified play. Gymnasiums offer limited sports and activity options that allow for physical distancing with no contact or limited shared equipment. Drop-in and registered programs offered modified outdoor and expanded indoor classes with small groups and no shared equipment. The pool returns to modified operation. We'll get into some more specifics in the following slide. So aquatics. To provide some greater context, with all of the great work being done by the Life Saving Society, WorkSafe, the risk with COVID in aquatics is not the water transmission itself, it's the physical distance requirements. So I wanted to provide that context so that it made more sense in terms of how we scoped this out. We are in level 2 right now, and we are preparing for level 3 as soon as September 8th. There will be no pool shutdown in September. The work has either been done or is being done right now for us to have a start date of September 8th. Level 3 with pool operations looks like reduced swim capacity. And I'd like to clarify that reduced swim capacity would be measured at peak times. The pool does not often operate at peak capacity Monday to Friday. What would be defined as peak times are generally Saturday afternoons, Sunday afternoons, typically when kids are out of school. No swim lessons, although this is part of the dial analogy that we have been leaning heavily on. As the Life Saving Society comes out with guidelines and further information on how certified lifeguards and swim instructors can participate in swim instruction in a safe manner. Probably no surprise here, there will be limited capacity in the hot tub to ensure physical distancing, and the steam room and teach pool will be closed until further on in the phases. Increased sanitation and modified change room usage will be in place. I will move on. Moving on to the arena and the ice rink. We anticipate opening the ice rink with normal operation in September. We are working and relying heavily on some of our main user groups to ensure that they have a demand that will help support the financial viability and the subsidy of the rink. We are also relying on, through the VIA Sport guidelines and through BC Hockey, COVID safety plans will be reviewed and endorsed through the PSOs. So the provincial sport organizations, such as BC Hockey, all review and work with their local sports organizations to ensure that as they return to play, they are doing so in a health and safety manner. not to put too fine a point on it, but when we say referred to play, it is not the way we used to do things. It is the way we are currently doing things. So it's going to look different for a while. Moving on to sports fields. In level 2, we are in modified outdoor programs. So they're open for larger groups with casual play and limited or no contact, kind of that bubble. Park ambassadors are stationed around to do checkpoints and educate. Sorry, Chair, are you asking questions?
No, that's fine. I didn't know I had this in front of the camera. Please proceed.
Sorry. And then level 3, modified outdoor programs and field user bookings open July, August, and through September. This is a bit of a balancing act, as our user groups and associations rely heavily on volunteer involvement. They themselves are spending the time to get organized and evaluate what makes sense for their local organization and their capacity. We will be working with them on an ongoing basis, I suspect case by case, as each of them decides to come back online in a manner that is safe and effective for them. The 55 recreational facility is currently in a level 2, and it's not going to look a whole lot different as we move into a level 3. Right now, our staff are focused on, our reduced staff are focused on providing safe summer camps for kids, and returning to service for the 55 in September will look like the following slides. We call this the 55 programming allocation schedule, which is a bit of a mouthful, but this is just to show the basically the allocation of how programs will be defined and offered. Monday to Friday, morning through afternoon, it will be 55 plus programming until the province of BC moves to phase 4. Community programming denotes that it could be any age available programming, from infant toddler programs all the way up through seniors. This will help reduce the pressure on Brennan Park and leverage the underutilized facility. Just as a side point, in January and February, Strong Start utilized the 55, and they have now been able to move back in. One of the silver linings of COVID is that the restoration company that Strong Start is working with was able to have some uninterrupted time to get their facilities back into operating condition, and they have asked me to acknowledge graciously the seniors for sharing that time with them. I'm going to shift right now to our two main existing recreation access programs. The first is quite simple. Well, there's two, the Kids Sports Squamish, and that is really for associations. So that's where parents and guardians can apply for assistance for their children to participate in the local associations. The second one is the Rec Access Pass, and pardon me, that's direct financial assistance. It is a program for participants to receive 50% off discounts on recreation programs. They also receive a 50% discount on admission and passes for swimming and skating. The eligibility is based on household income thresholds or public benefit recipient status. Criteria for eligibility in administrative policy and authority is granted within the fees and charges bylaw. Here's just a snapshot of the eligibility. I won't go through it too finely, but there will be, staff are hoping for a more robust decision in a little bit. So the Recreation Access Pass during COVID is obviously a lever we want our community to know about. Potential to expand the criteria for the Access Pass to recipients of CERB. There's also potential to increase the free or low barrier program with drop-ins, much like the model that we're servicing right now in our programs in the park. It is difficult to forecast exact financial implications, and I think we'll finish the rest of the presentation and then probably circle back to this council discussion point in terms of the local government provision of the recreation subsidy to those receiving CERB. I know that Ms. Golbeck had some further notes that she wanted to jump in with, so I will turn it over to her.
Thanks. Can you keep sharing your screen but turn off your video?
Yes.
Thank you. And do you mind also going back one slide for a moment? Back one more? Yeah, that one. Thank you. And just wanting to say a few more things about the financial implications and the council discussion that we're hoping you folks are interested in having. So the reason we can't, in case this wasn't obvious, forecast the exact financial implications is because we're not totally clear on what uptake would be. Currently, we have quite a low uptake on the Recreation Access Program, but we also have a very administratively burdensome application process. So the criteria is fairly straightforward. There's some barriers in place and some process people have to go through in order to receive the benefit from recreation. And so we're interested in making that a little bit easier to access for people. As Devin mentioned earlier, in recreation, we do see our role as being a public benefit, and we are very aware that our community is many at the moment, and we want to make it easy for people to access the benefits that are available to them so that they're able to continue to participate in recreation programming and recreation services, because we believe that that's good for people and it's good for community resilience in difficult times. The expansion of the eligibility criteria to being to include the CERB benefit status. The rationale for that is similar to what I just mentioned, in that you know, if your income has gone from whatever it was to $2,000 a month on the CERB, recreation is likely something, signing your kid up for summer camp or swimming lessons or you know, other programs is probably something that's going to be dropping off your priority list. And so in doing so, we would enable you know, greater access for people who are experiencing financial hardship and challenging times. The conversation that council may wish to weigh in on is that this is a benefit from other levels of government, and to what degree is it a municipal priority to be providing that subsidy to a potentially wider net of people, and weighing the benefits of competing priorities there. So next slide, please, Devin. So as we're restoring programs and services in the phased manner that Devin described, we are aware that there are financial implications, just the same as private businesses are having financial implications in opening in a way that's compliant with the public health restrictions. We have modified things to reduce capacity, increase safety, and so there's training, there's ratio differences, which makes a significant dent in our programming model in terms of the subsidy we're required to provide. Staff equipment rentals like porta potties and supplies to make sure that people are being able to keep safe. Next slide, please. Slide delays are killing me. There you go. Thank you. So expanding the criteria of the access program, as I was just explaining, does also increase the gap between expenses and revenues, because then some program revenue would go down. And so this is the conversation that we need to weigh the social value against the potential cost. And without the ability to truly, get a sense of how much uptake there would be on this benefit, it is hard to say. If council is supportive of this, we've done some fairly high-level modeling. One of the things that we're also looking to change in the fall is extending the summer camp model into the fall, because we are aware that many classes and grades will not be going back to school full-time, and some will be doing distance learning exclusively. And so we see it as a priority to be able to extend that camp model to give parents some relief, as well as give kids some social interaction and structure, and have some fun educational activities. And so we've modeled that a little bit and looking at the financial impacts of that, as well as the potentially subsidizing recipients of the CERB benefit. And so we're going to, pending council direction on these items, we are going to do a deeper dive and a more thorough budget analysis so that we're able to anticipate roughly what the impact will be. So yeah, I don't know how much of this needs to be spoken to. We've already said many of these things. Just wanting to recognize that the regulatory environment we're working in is continuing to change, like basically every day. And so we are making these plans as detailed as we possibly can with the information we have, and recognizing that they are living documents. And so we are really trying to take a continuous improvement approach to the planning work that we're doing. I keep saying to Devin that, remarking, goodness, how good are we at working in the gray area right now and working through uncertainty. We're really getting a lot of practice at it. And rather than sort of deferring decisions till later when things are more clear, we're trying to make planning decisions now in the absence of concrete, permanent information. So I'm sure you can appreciate that from where you sit as well, Council. I think that's all we wanted to say, and we'll open it for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Goldbeck, Ms. Guest. And I'll just refer back to the slide. Perhaps we may as well see if we can find our way back to that slide. Local government provision of recreation subsidy to those receiving assistance from other levels of government, that is the CERB. This is what you suggested we circle back to, but I open up for questions from council. Anyone? Councillor Herford, I see, and Councillor Pettingill. Please go ahead, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. You brought up there was a great point raised earlier about the sort of the burden of proof or administrative burden to gain access to this program. And I was curious how, is that something that needs to be repeated at every registration? So if my child's into a few different sports that have to be done at each time, or is that something that has you're part of this program for I don't know, the calendar year or something like that, or how has it been working so far without the CERB counted in, obviously?
Devin, would you like to speak to that, or would you like me to?
It is reviewed annually. So if you qualify for the RAP pass, it expires after 1 year. It's a continual intake. It's not a calendar year, so it rolls.
Thank you. And then the CERB program, we have uncertainty as to where, when it's going to come to a conclusion. And also, am I right to assume that we don't really have an idea of of the numbers locally. I haven't seen anything to that end, and I don't think that they've been sharing yet for us to forecast how many people might become eligible for this yet. We don't have any. That's one of the moving targets. Am I correct?
Yeah, we have not gotten that data.
I'd be pretty. I'm curious to listen to the rest of council weigh in here, but given the one of the things through all the various programs that that have been rolled out that seems to be a constant is a low administrative burden to plug into it. So if we can see that someone's reached that threshold with the CERB, and that can be documented quickly, then maybe we would see a greater uptake. Similar to the I'm curious to see what that does to what this could potentially do to enrollment, and I don't know how to forecast the impact of this. Have you guys done? Has any sort of rough work been done there? If this program is a tremendous success, do we have capacity? Like, where's the threshold for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'd love to add a couple of comments to that. So the clearest answer to your question is no, we don't know exactly what the uptake is going to be and whether or not we have capacity for that, and that's part of the financial modeling we need to do. We may need to set, a cap or have a plan for, financially, what do we do in the back end if uptake is very high, and in terms of staffing and program enrollment when we're already at a pretty strict cap in the context of COVID with how many people can enroll in a program for ratios. But the other thing I just wanted to quickly add to that is the thinking of having to get a referral letter and bring it in and make people kind of jump through hoops in order to access benefits is really, it's a bit of an outmoded way of thinking. And nowadays the thinking tends to be that if you want somebody to get the benefit that you propose out of your program, you want it to be easy for them to do that. And so if we don't currently have people who are on income assistance accessing our program because they don't want to have to go have an interview with somebody at Sea to Sky and get a letter and ask a bunch of questions and then bring it in, or whatever that looks like, if they perceive that to be too much work and maybe not really pleasant work, to put the burden on them to do that, then the result is that we now open up the door for people on income assistance to be accessing recreation programming more because we've made it easier. I think we see that as a really positive thing.
Thank you. I would agree with that sentiment, and I think that whether it's at this point in time, whether it's the CERB, which could be something that's easy to present, and someone else has done some of the background work, in this case being the federal government, might be an easy way to do that, and I would like to drop those, in general, drop those barriers down in that process. So maybe an easy way to do that here is to simply align with the CERB over the next amount of time, whatever that is. But okay, thank you. That's enough for me for now. I will listen.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingale.
Yeah, thank you. And I had
I'd like to be put on the list, Chair, Samir.
Thank you. Very good.
I had questions about the other parts of the presentation as well, or a question. So, but I'll just on this piece, I think I'm with my colleague where I think I am comfortable with using CERB as a criteria and easing access. I do also think, though, I would like to have a cap and a time frame for that cap. So, if it ends up being wildly successful, we don't get in over our head. We can sort of review and see where we are. So it gives us that sort of bit of a safety net, and sort of in either case, review after a month or whatever time period we decide and see if we need to adjust that cap up or down.
Mayor Elliott.
thank you. Just on this issue, I agree with the idea that we should make this less burdensome. The CERB will run out, so this is an opportunity to look at our program overall and make sure that those families that need support for the long term see a pathway to that if the CERB is ended, but people's financial hardship may continue for quite some time. I do wonder, just tangentially, you know, I'm assuming that there's cash flow modeling going on by our finance staff, and that when an appropriate time might be for that to come back to council, because it doesn't feel like something that you want to surprise us with at the end of the year, but rather give us check-ins as we go along. And I would say we need to wait until after people pay their taxes to really have a better idea of that. But perhaps sometime in the fall, so that council can weigh where we are in terms of supporting the opening of facilities where we are not going to see the revenue to help offset in the same degree. We know transit fares are down, and we're still running a full transit system. And now with the challenge of providing assistance for our recreation programs, which I think we should do. But again, what does that look like over time? So I would just like to suggest that that comes back to council in the fall. One of the questions I did have was around our gymnasium, and it sounds like we won't be able to offer gymnastics, which is our most popular sport, because it says no shared equipment. And I know people think soccer and hockey is very popular, but gymnastics is where it's at. So can you comment on that, Ms. Guest?
Yeah, absolutely. My hope is that through Gymnastics BC and our very dedicated gymnastics contract instructor, that we can look at it. Shared equipment can be is kind of defined by balls, bats, like hockey sticks. Gymnastic equipment, because you can support physical distancing, it is a bit of a different game, and so I remain hopeful that we can work together on a plan that that looks a little bit different.
Okay. I'm not sure how you guys are wading through all this stuff. It's really, some of it almost seems contradictory, and yet you want to be able to open up these facilities. So I appreciate the patience you all must have to try and figure this out. One of my other questions was, we talk about opening the pool and the rink to vulnerable populations, like seniors and others in our level 4. But that surprised me. I actually thought we would open up for them earlier in level 3 when numbers were lower, and actually test out our process that way. But maybe you could explain why they are delayed a little longer.
Through Mayor and Chair, straight up, that was a typo and an error. I have had several revisions of this plan, and as the plan became less conservative and more holistic, I actually just didn't catch it, but I do hope that we will have dedicated times for seniors and vulnerable populations for the pool specifically in September.
Okay, and then my last question is just about the programming at the 55. Obviously that programming during the day is for 55 and up. They are a more vulnerable population, and so are we putting in enhanced cleaning overnight to make sure that that facility is sanitized?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
Chair?
Yes, that's Councillor Race.
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Thank you. So I just wanted to confirm with staff. My understanding is that we have the ability to borrow from reserves to meet deficits. And I also support staff's approach to discounted fees and to using the CERB as one of the yardsticks or the measurements or qualifiers, I guess, which is consistent with other things, for example, how we're dealing with the campground. So I think that's an appropriate measure. And we don't know what the deficit might be or how much of an uptake we'll have on that. But I think, from my perspective, we just take the risk. I think that's something we as a municipal government should do to help our population get through this rather extraordinary event. And I think if we do end up with a deficit at the end of the year, then hopefully we can borrow from reserves to cover that off. And then I'm quite happy to see that repaid then over the next, whatever it takes, 1 or 2 or 3 budgets to replenish that reserve. But I think that is, it is a bit of a, I don't want to call it a risk, but it is a bit of a, sticking our neck out a little bit. But I think, it's exposure that I think we can manage, and I think it's appropriate in these particular circumstances. But I think I recall from a previous conversation that we do have the ability, as a result of ministerial orders, to borrow from reserves for something like this. And I just wanted to see if staff had a comment on that.
Staff, Ms. Goldbeck, Ms. Guest?
Is Heather with us? No? Sorry, let me turn my thing back on. We had a conversation about this morning, and we're not, oh, sorry, Linda, did you want to speak?
No, it's okay. I see Heather now.
Okay. Go ahead, Heather. We've been dealing with this, trying to interpret this and trying to make plans. So Heather will be most up to date.
Hi there. Just to answer the question through the chair. Yes, that's correct. We do have the ability to borrow against reserves if necessary. When we're doing our deeper dive, we're going to look where there's other costs that we can use to offset this rather than within that department, with the hopes that, these costs that we'll have in declines in other areas will cover most of this. However, at the end of the year or getting closer, probably more in the fall, we'll have a better understanding of where that uptake will be. And then we can certainly look at, next steps in terms of if we need to go to reserves or accumulated surplus. But we'll bring that back to council in the fall.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to clarify on the seniors piece, because I as well thought we're doing priority access for seniors and other vulnerable populations at Brennan Park sort of at an earlier stage. And my understanding had been that Activity 55 is closed to seniors at the moment, but would be opening soon. So can you just clarify what's available to seniors now and what will be available in short order?
So our most vulnerable, through Chair, our most vulnerable would be defined as our participants in our NeuroFit program, and they will be returning to Brennan Park facility in a very safe and controlled manner in July. And so that also helps reduce, it gets the existing participants off the wait list and into a program that has not been able to run. So that is who we're serving in phase 3 before we are able to open up the 5-5.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the discussion point of local government provision of recreation subsidy for those that are on the CERB, I agree with those who have spoken earlier that doesn't make sense to recreate the program locally when CERB is already in place and is a great barometer for us. I had a question, but I'll hold off. That's all I have for now.
Thank you. Further comments or questions? I'd just like to summarize or echo. Oh, excuse me. Please go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yes, thank you. If it's time for comments, I just wanted to, and it's in relation to the prior presentation as well. My sense in talking to people and sort of seeing what's going on is that BC has been so effective with COVID that I think there is a bit of complacency, and we're feeling safer than maybe we really are. And so I do have, I really appreciate the efforts that staff are doing, and understand very much the community's desire to get back at things they've been doing before. But I am sort of mindful, especially because it's not just about keeping the participants safe, but keeping our staff safe. And being mindful too of all this work. It means a whole lot of operational change at each level, and we have to be ready to go back a few levels too. And so, and maybe this one speaks a little bit more to the prior presentation, but just very mindful that when we're communicating with the public, that, for me anyways, I think it's really important that we're keeping our staff safe and understanding, the public can sometimes choose whether or not to go to a program, but it's not as easy for staff to choose. I know our staff are often choosing to work, but I think that's something that we have to keep very much top of mind, and just very appreciative of the work, and just how much work is really underneath what looks like a few simple tables.
Thank you. Other comments, Council? I would just like to summarize a few points where I believe we have good consensus. We are wanting a low administrative burden. We're interested in a check-in or to consider a time frame for the measures that we put in place. We don't want surprises, but at the same time, we are generally sympathetic to taking risks on behalf of our citizens, and then we seem to be acknowledging that we're in a good position to be able to do so for the time being. We have also been alerted to the fact that there may be a limited time span to a program like the CERB, so this is something we'll have to consider in time as well. And I'd just like to echo the comment of Mayor Elliott that we, of course, I'm sure, all appreciate the patience of staff and your diligence to sort out all of this miscellaneous information from different organizations and sources. And from what I have in front of me here is another exceptionally clear report to digest for Council. Any further comments? Then we don't really have a recommendation to make. I hope that you've gathered the input that you require, staff.
Yes, thank you.
Very good. And we will then be returning to this before too long. Then I will entertain a motion to, Councillor Race.
I was going to move to receive.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Herford. All in favor? Any opposed? Very good. Thank you. And, then I'll entertain a motion to terminate. Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor French. All in favor? Any opposed? May I remind everyone that we do have to return to our closed portion of the special meeting, and when we do so, do use the closed meeting link. Thank you.